You know, fishing lets the child in me come out. I love throwing rocks. I like carrying a good pocket knife, a nice kind of thing. You know, guys, I like peeing in the woods. I like to see the birds and the animals in the wild. I like waters. I like the sight and the sound and the touch of waters. McLean, in his River Runs Through It, said, "I am haunted by waters." Me too. It's a nice kind of thing. You know, every time I go out on a fishing trip, there are some memorable moments. There are some wonderful times that I remember later on. In fly fishing, those moments seem to happen a little more often than other kinds of fishing. I like the casting. I like throwing that line back and forth, and the sweet feel of a good cast is like hitting a baseball just right, or a golf ball. I like that weightless fly floating down to the water. I envy you people that are just beginning, because your moments are even going to be greater. They're going to be wonderful. You know, after the hard disciplines of learning how to fly cast, after you can get the ball in play, your learning is over now, my friends. For the rest of your lives, it's going to be discovery. It's going to be fun. Fly fishing. Here's how I think it all began. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, probably a day like today, with insects all over and trout selectively feeding on these little mayflies, I think a couple of guys were probably standing on a bridge like this and they couldn't catch those fish. One of those guys was our old friend, Joe Schmatkapop. You remember Joe. Joe is the guy that said, "I don't cast so good, but I catch fish." And today, if I can't catch them on worms, they can't be caught. But his friend may have been the first genius in fly fishing. He figured out that he couldn't put those delicate little mayflies on the crude hook, so he put a little piece of wool on the hook, and he reached over and dapped the fly on the water with his line like this, and the fish came up and ate the fly, and fly fishing was born, my friends. And then another genius came along, and I think this fellow figured out that if he put the weight in the line instead of this fly, maybe he could throw the line out a little bit. So he wove horsehair together to make it good and heavy. Had it tapered, of course, to tie the fly on. Now he had a little bit of weight. Now he could use a shorter rod and a longer line, and he could throw the line back and forth because there was a little bit of weight in there. Probably get out 20, 30 feet. And then another genius came along, and he figured out if you could stop the rod and form a little loop in the line as it was going out, like this. Shoo! Good cast. Now we can cast 100 feet or more, and we can present that weightless fly almost as delicately as they could when they first started dapping the fly. Roderick Haig Brown said of fish, "It must be the fish themselves that make fishing, the strangeness and beauty of fish, their often visible remoteness, their ease in another world. and the mystery of their movements and their habits and whims. Where fish hang out, we call it reading the water. A lot of times when you see fish on the surface, you don't have to worry about where fish are because you know where they are. Then you just have to figure out how to catch them. Sometimes you don't see them on the surface of the water. Sometimes we see the fish under the water. The difference between the really great fishermen and us mortals is that they see more than we do. They've taught themselves to see, to observe, to discover. What I want you to do is not just look at the surface of the water, wear your polarized glasses, and focus on the bottom of the water. Fish, very simple animals, not very intelligent, unpredictable, and extremely wary. Let's take a closer look at the fish. Notice that the gills in a fish are what take oxygen out of the water and allows them to breathe. Water passes through their mouth and out of their gills, and they breathe comfortably. That's why in moving water, you're always going to find a fish positioning himself into the current, always. How does a fish see? A fish sees a little differently than human beings. Human beings have very good distant vision, but a fish has very, very good close vision. You can't see your finger at the end of your nose, but a trout can. They can examine, they can come up and touch that fly with their nose and examine it in minute detail. Fish have eyes on the side of their head, not in the front of their head, so they can see all the way around and back, maybe to an area all the way around, maybe 30 degrees behind them, so that the only blind spot a fish has is directly behind them. Fish hear very, very well in the water. They've got a set of internal ears that are not too functional, but what they have is something called a lateral line. The lateral line are nerves that come close to the outside of a fish's body and run the entire length of the body. That lateral line picks up vibrations in the water incredibly well. So the truth is that the fish are very, very conscious of sound. That means you have to teach yourself to walk softly. That means that when you're walking along the edge of a river, don't walk right on the edge. Move back just a few feet so that you're not scaring those fish. They're so wary. It also means that hearing tunes the fish into food. You might have a little insect fluttering on the surface of the water. Water carries sound extremely well, and the fish can zero in on that food. Fish really need three things when they're in the water. They need cover from above because they're constantly being preyed upon by birds. They need fairly slow-moving water because it's hard to hold position in fast water. And what they also need is a source of food. When all of those things are present, we call that a good lie. Shallow water is where you're going to find most fish food. Shallow water has more sunlight. More sunlight means more vegetation. More vegetation means more little organisms. Shallow water like this is just full of vegetation and full of food. But it's a bad place for cover. Fish need cover from above. They find it in the shade. They find it in a cut bank like that over there, underneath that bank. It's almost like a little cave back there. They find it in broken water. They even find it in water depth. You know where you really find fish? You find fish on the edge between cover and food. That's where they kind of hold. They can drop off into the shallow water for food. If danger threatens, down into the cover. I want you to remember one word only from this entire chapter. The word is edges. It's the secret. Now, our friend Joe Schmatkopop would call this a little gray bug. Put on a little gray fly and he'd catch fish. Many expert fly fishermen do exactly the same thing. But I think that a little knowledge of what fish eat is intriguing. It might even help you to catch more fish. Most of the sport fish that we go after are predatory. That means they'll eat almost anything they can get their mouth around, including their own children. But almost all fish start off by eating insects, especially in fresh water. And the trout, someone once said of the trout that it was the fish that was perfectly designed for the fly fisherman, because the trout continues to eat insects throughout its life. Let's take a look at some of the bugs in the water. Bugs, I know what you're thinking of, bugs. You're thinking of ants in your picnic basket, and you're thinking of cockroaches and hornets and bad bugs. I want you people to think of butterflies, beautiful little animals, like a mayfly. Let me tell you the incredible story of the mayfly. The mayfly spends most of his life, 364 days of the year, underneath the water as a nymph. On the last day of its life, it either floats or swims up to the surface of the water, the back breaks open, and out crawls the winged insect. And it stands on the surface of the water with its wings upright, like a little sailboat, until it pumps a little juice into its wings and body, and then it flies off and lands in a tree or a bush or some vegetation, and molts once again in a few hours, becoming a sexually mature insect that can't even eat. And the insects go off into the air, and they bounce around in the air in a mating dance, finally mating in the air. The females then fly down to the water, dip their tails usually, and get rid of their eggs into the water, and they die. These nymphs hide very, very well underneath the water. They hide under rocks and in vegetation. It's a little hard for the trout to get to them. But when they're floating up in the water like that, or even swimming, those tiny little animals, they become very susceptible to the trout. And trout are opportunistic feeders. They're going to start feeding when these nymphs start coming up to the surface. And they're going to feed on them there as nymphs. They feed on this dun standing on the surface of the water. When many of these mayflies are emerging at the same time, we call that a hatch. Newly emerged mayflies floating down the river on top of the surface film, and the fish are on them. And finally, when the female lays her eggs, she dies and falls to the water. We call them spinners or spent wings. They look like little airplanes floating down the river. Fish take them readily. The caddisfly, or the sedge fly, is almost as important a trout food as the mayfly. And you can readily identify these little guys. They've got that pup tent-shaped wings. They're kind of mottled grays or brown. They really look like a little moth. You frequently see these flies fluttering around vegetation or under a tree. Like the mayfly, the caddisfly spends most of its life underneath the water, and they look like little worms. We used to call them periwinkles when we were kids. You could actually use those things for bait. They're little light-colored things with dark heads. Sometimes they build little cases like this. Some are made out of little pieces of vegetation, sometimes tiny stones even. When they're ready to emerge, they seal off the case, transform inside the case, just the way a caterpillar does in its cocoon. When they're ready to come out, when they've been transformed, they chew their way out of the case, swim to the top. They don't fool around. They skitter across the top of the water, and they're gone. The trout, when they take these guys, are very, very splashy because they have to be quick. It's not as genteel as the mayfly. The caddisfly. Much of caddisfly activity happens at night. You know, in that magic hour when day turns into night, when things seem to happen, the animals move and the fish start rising, if you can't really tell what those fish are taking, I want you to try a caddisfly. And then we have the stonefly nymph. Look at this friendly little guy. He looks just like a mayfly nymph, only just a little bit bigger. Let me put this back in the water. Stoneflies, they're only found in really fast water. They need a lot of oxygen. Stoneflies live underneath the water for maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 years. And these guys, when they're ready to hatch, they walk out of the river. They walk out of the river, climb onto a stone or a tree, and the back splits open. See that? And out crawls an adult stonefly. And you can recognize an adult stonefly because their wings are flat like this. Remember that again. The mayflies look like a little sailboat. The caddisflies look like a pup tent. And the stoneflies, the wings are flat on top. Most of the time, they're accessible to the trout as a nymph. And when the female comes down to the water and lays her eggs, she'll dip her tail like that in the water. And then you have other insects that live underneath the water. We have damselflies and dragonfly nymphs and midges. It's a fascinating world down there, my friends. I hope you're going to look into it a little bit. Then we have the terrestrial, the land insects. We've got ants and beetles and spiders and that wonderful grasshopper. And we imitate all of those insects with our artificial flies. Flies. Flies really are fun things, guys. You know, there's tens of thousands of different flies that are available today. Even God doesn't know the names of all of them. Let me show you a few. This guy here is an Atlantic salmon fly, developed by the Brits to catch the Atlantic salmon. When the Britons ruled the world, they brought back feathers from India and from Africa, exotic things. And the fly tyers tried to outdo each other by getting as many of those feathers in as possible. They're still tying these today, and they catch fish. These are called attractor patterns. Attractor patterns really don't imitate anything in nature. They just attract those fish. Salmon that are coming up into the rivers are not really interested in eating. They're interested in spawning. And these little attractor flies kind of turn them on. Today, we still use similar attractor flies for salmon and steelhead. Here's a little beauty. This is a nice, simple one. It's called the lantern. Ed Hankey's fly. Isn't that a beauty? We've got attractor patterns for our trout fishing also. Let me show you one here. This one here is called the royal wolf. It's got green and red and white and brown. It imitates nothing, but it catches fish. You know when I use these bright attractor patterns a lot? When the fish really aren't zeroing in on anything, when I just feel like fishing a dry fly. On bright days, I use bright flies. Dark days, dark flies. It's an old fishing tale, but I think it's a true one. Good fly. We have that royal wolf in a wet fly too, a sinking fly. Look at this guy. This is a royal wolf or a royal coachman streamer fly. This kind of streams back like this, and when you pull this thing through the water, it looks like a little fish moving through the water. Bright, nice attractor pattern. The current trend these days is on exact imitations. We got a bunch of scientists out here now, and now we're tying flies that look more like the real thing than the real thing. Look at this guy. This is a stone fly. It looks like it would come out and could almost eat you right now. You know, let me tell you a little something about flies. What we try to do with our flies is give the impression of life. It's like an impressionistic painting versus a photograph. Very commonly, a photograph stops life. It's not really alive. Whereas something vague and a little fuzzy, done by a great artist, looks like it's moving, like it's alive. We frequently take a fly and tie it. These are called hackles. That's a word for a feather. And we wind the feather around the hook. These little brown things here are barbules, and they stick out and they move a little bit. They give the impression of life. Remember that little mayfly trembling along on top of the water? This guy imitates him. In rough water, we generally use flies that float real well for our dry flies. Look at this one. This is called a humpy. Look how heavily it's tied. It's called a humpy because of that big hump in the body. That's tied with deer hair, which is hollow. Allows it to float real well. This is a good rough water fly. Our nymphs are kind of generic. Most of the time, I like little nymphs like this. Mottled black and brown nymphs. Generally tied with animal hair, and that animal hair becomes translucent in the water. And see all these little hairs sticking up? Those little hairs actually move and give a feeling of life. I have to tell you a story about nymphs. I once took a class in aquatic entomology from a fly fisherman, and he said, you know, this stream bottom is all real dark, rich silt. He said, what color will the nymphs be in the water? And all the people in the class said, they'd be black or dark brown. And he said, you're right. So that's what you'd use. You'd use real dark flies, wouldn't you? And everybody said yes. And then he said, do you know why there are no light-colored nymphs there? Because the trout have eaten them all. Sometimes you've got to be a little contrary, too, you know. Streamer flies. Let me show you a couple of streamer flies. Here's a nice little streamer fly. This looks like a little fish. See that? We pull that through the water. Beautiful little streamer fly. And we imitate the little terrestrial. You want to see a little ant? Look at this little guy. Those of you who backpack up into the high mountain country, a great fly to have. Black bass flies. Some of the black bass flies are great flies. Look at this one. This is called a hair mouse. Really looks like a mouse, doesn't it? And you pull this thing through the water and wonderful things happen there too. Bloop, 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 bloop. We'll do a little bass fishing later. Saltwater flies are taking off. Saltwater fly fishing is taking off now. Everybody is fishing salt water. And we've got all kinds of new flies coming up. In the flats, that's knee-deep water. You've got people going out and fishing for bonefish and permit with little flies that look like this, a little shrimp fly. See that? Neat little pattern. We even have flies for the big game fish. Here's a big tarpon fly. This is the kind of fly. Look at the size of that hook. This guy pulled through the water can catch 100-pound plus fish. Flies really are a fun thing, guys. You might even want to try fly tying. It's a simple thing and easy to get into. It's kind of fun to catch a fish on your own fly. Let me show you the beginnings of fly tying. I've caught a lot of fish on this fly. What I'm going to do is take this thread, and I'm going to wrap the thread on the hook. Lay it across the hook, wrap over itself like this, back toward the back. Get 5 or 6 turns. Cut off this tag end. Couple more turns back, and then all the way forward again. Little hank of hair here. Clean that up a little bit, get the ends straight, like that. Lay these on top of the hook, just past the bend of the hook there. 2 or 3 turns, wrap it on top of the hook like that. 1, 2, 3, good. Take all these stubs and pull them back. A couple of turns in front. Put a couple half hitches in like this. 1, 2. I'm going to put 1 extra, just in case. Now I cut the thread off. Take all these stubs and kind of hold them all together like this. And with 1 cut of the scissors, voila! The fly is done. This fly, appropriately enough, is called the hank of hair. It's a great caddis imitation, and it's a winner. Moving water. Montgomery, in his great book, The Way of a Trout, said it is the most wonderful of all inanimate things, infinitely attractive to small children, lovers, and fly fishermen. These small mountain streams are the beginnings of rivers. It's going to be a lovely place for us to begin our fishing. Let's get a leader out here. Okay, you know, leaders used to be a problem, but now the tapered leaders you buy in a shop are just beautiful, wonderful things. One of the problems that's been eliminated. There is one little problem, however, with these leaders, and I want to show you that. Taking these things apart is a problem. I want you to slip it into your fingers like this, and take the butt section, that's the fat end of this tapered leader, and kind of slide it out like this. Get that out there 2 or 3 or 4 times, and then it peels right off the end of your hand. Perfect. Now I want you to take the butt section, right like this, and we're going to tie a loop in it. We call this a surgeon's loop. Double that over, make a little turn, around twice, pull it nice and tight. Now I've got a little loop in the end of my fly line. I'm just going to make a loop-to-loop connection here. Slip this loop in like this and then back into itself like this. And all set. I like short leaders on a little river like this. This is about a 7.5 foot leader here. And you know what we're going to put on? We'll start off with that old hank of hair. Now, fishing these small mountain streams aren't very fussy. A few simple flies are really all you need for a day's fishing. It's time to learn a few knots. Good loops. You got to stop the tip of the rod to make that loop form. Watch. Now we're going to do some knots. You need a few basic knots in your fly fishing. What I'd like you to do is get yourself a piece of rope or string or anything you've got laying around the house. Let's do these few knots right now. We're going to start off with something called a surgeon's loop. Double over the line like this. So you've got a doubled piece of line. Now make a little loop in there, like so. Go through the loop once. I've got a simple overhand knot like this. Now go through one more time and pull the knot up. Pull all knots up tightly, but don't pull them up quickly. If you pull them up too quickly, it creates heat, especially with monofilament, and weakens the knot. But it must be pulled up tight. helps to spit on them a little bit. Get a little saliva on them, and when you pull it up. The loop-to-loop connection, you take one loop, stick it inside the other like this, goes inside itself, and voila, a perfect loop-to-loop connection. This happens to be a fly. We're going to tie this fly on. We're going to take our tippet, run it through the eye of the fly like this. Double it over, hold these two lines apart 5 or 6 times around here, and then take this tag end through this opening, back through the large opening. Hold the tag end, get a little saliva on the knot, pull it up, done, the cinch knot. And now I'm going to show you a knot to tie the tippet onto your leader, something we use fairly often. The best knot for that is a knot called the surgeon's knot, double surgeon's knot. Take your 2 lines and put them together like this. Take a good look at this, because I never want you to do it again as long as you live. This is a Joe Schmatka Pop move. What I'd like you to do is overlap the 2 lines like this. Make a little loop in there, go through that loop with the long end and the short end once. See how it looks? Go through twice. Sometimes I go through 3 times. Makes me feel good. I don't really know whether it helps the knot that much. Hold the 4 ends, get a little saliva on it, pull them up good and tight. Cut off these short ends, and you've got a perfect connection. And now, let's put a touch of floating on this dry fly, and we'll be ready to go. Where are we going to find the fish in this small stream? There are many, many places. Let me show you some of the places in this pool. Broken water is good cover for these fish. Right down the middle of this pool, there's some nice broken water. Good place for fish to hold. We need water depth in a small stream like this for cover. Shade is wonderful. And in a stream like this, there's always shade because there's a lot of overhanging trees. It's a little canyon-like. The edges of those currents, look at that edge going up there, a perfect place between the rough and the quiet water. The rocks right out there in the middle are good cover for fish. And there, on the right side, is a nice seam of rough water and quiet, good places. I'm going to tell you a secret place now, people. I'm going to tell you a secret place that I don't want you to tell anybody about. It's called the eye of the current. What I want you to do is look carefully now and look up the edge of this current on the left-hand side, right up there, and see where the rough water and the quiet water come together, and it comes together and forms a little V up on the top. Right at the top of that V is a great place to find a fish. Let's give it a shot. First the short cast, and then longer and longer and longest. It makes sense, because then I won't be throwing the fly line over those near fish. Watch. I also cast a little bit different. You'll find me roll casting a lot, where I swing the rod around, fish that in, fish it in, get it into a roll casting position, and just roll it out there again. Easy cast to make. A lot of times when I make a backward and forward cast, I don't go whomp, whomp, and really make a hard cast going back. I just kind of swing it around like this. I just kind of unload on the forward cast only. Swing it around and unload on the forward cast. Swing it around and unload on the forward cast. It's an easy way to cast, and the leader never gets tangled when you do that. Our trophy for today, one perfect little jewel. Oh boy, look at all that insect life. Look at those giant caddis, full of food. This river is much richer than our little mountain stream. Rough water. It looks like it'd be too rough out there for any fish. Where are we going to find fish in this rough water? I'm going to tell you where, my friends. Everywhere. Everywhere. All that broken water on top is fantastic cover. And when you see broken water like this, what that means is the bottom is irregular. It's full of these huge rocks. That means the water is moving very slowly along the bottom. The fish can lay down there on the bottom, protected from above by the broken water. And that fast water in this rich river is bringing a lot of food. They lay down there in the bottom in that slow water. When some food comes by, they can just tilt their little pectoral fins, come up like an airplane, bang, grab the food, and back down again. A perfect place for fish. And fish can be anywhere out in that rippled water. A very, very good place to fish. A lot of little nymphs in this water. I think we're going to start off by doing a little nymph fishing. Now our friend Joe Schmatkopop, he would plow his way across this river and fish that far bank over there. Because deep down in his heart, he knows every fish in the river's on the far bank. But we're going to fish close. We're going to start our fishing there. Nymph fishing in this broken water. I use very short casts in this water because you can get quite close to the fish with all this noise around. I like that swing around cast too. Swing it around and lay it in like that. That's a nice cast for this river with these kind of heavy weighted nymphs. Nymph fishing, there's been a million words written about nymph fishing and a lot of techniques, lifting the rod, pulling the line, doing all kinds of complicated things. The truth is, nymph fishing is a very, very simple thing. We cast it out there, let it drift naturally. I watch the end of the line as I kick out a little bit of extra line. That line twitches or moves, I can set the hook. And when the fly swings around, there's a good chance for a fish. And then when it ends the swing and just hangs in the current, I always let it in there for a few seconds, because sometimes a fish takes it right there. And then I fish it back a few feet always, because a fish will take it there. The truth of the matter is, in nymph fishing, if that nymph is in the water, you've got an excellent chance to catch a fish. There are different things that you can do to increase efficiency in nymph fishing. Some people put a little extra weight on their leader close to the fly. You know that some people actually put a bobber on the end? They put the, a couple of feet back from the fly and throw the bobber out on the water. When the bobber goes down, they got a fish. You know what they say down south? There ain't nothing in the world so pretty as the place in the water where the cork's just been. Bobber fishing, very efficient way to catch fish. We call it in fly fishing indicator fishing. Watch how the indicator fishermen cast. My son calls that the windshield wiper cast. Whoosh. Whoosh. Streamer fly fishing for trout. great way to catch trout. It's also a great way to catch all of the game fish. Streamer flies, imitations of those little bait fish. Good for bluegills to tarpon. Very, very similar to nymph fishing. As long as we've got that fly in the water, we've got a chance for a fish while it's drifting, while it's swinging, and while we're retrieving. With a streamer fly, we do a little better on the retrieve. And we do best when the fly is swinging. The swing is the thing in streamer fishing. You know, the salmon and steelhead fishermen really work on that swing. And the great salmon and steelhead fishermen have developed a feel, a sense of how fast that fly needs to be moving to get a strike. Most of the time, it's a little bit slower than you think. Let me show you how you can increase or decrease the speed. If I cast that fly directly across the current like this, what happens is all these intervening currents pick up the line and pull the fly a little faster. I can also increase the speed by pulling line as it's swinging. See that? The way to slow the line down is I can angle my cast downstream a little like this. Let a little line slip out because I want that fly to sink. Let it slip down. Follow with the tip of my rod. Let a little line slip out as it's swinging. Now I'm getting a slower swing. Slow that thing down. That speed is something you're going to have to get some experience doing. Keep changing, though. That's a key word. The other thing that you've got to remember is after you've made a couple of casts, move downstream and cover new water. Move downstream and cover new water. Old Joe Schmutkapop works himself into a good position, looks good over there, and makes 87 casts to the same place. People, if you're not catching fish, you've got to remember one word: change. Change the fly, change your position, change the speed of the fly swinging in the current. It's a good word to remember: change. To those of you people that haven't waded before, you're in for a treat. Wading with just a little bit of experience is really a fun part of fishing. I'd like you to get a rod and reel. Those of you that live near a fly shop, that's the best place to go. Go in and get yourself one there with their help. Those of you that don't, I'd recommend that you get yourself a rod about 8.5 or 9 feet long, something that balances with the weight of a number 6 fly line. That's my favorite all-purpose rod. You know, you can spend as little as a good dinner for a fly rod and reel. You can also spend about the price of a good automobile. Whatever. I really want you to go out and buy a fly rod and reel and line tomorrow. Don't wait. Smooth water, the chess game of trout fishing. I claim the fish here are so smart, they not only can tell you the name of the fly you're using, they can tell you how much you paid for it. Well, we know they're not that intelligent, but that wariness really becomes selectivity in this quiet water. Selectivity, let me tell you a moment about selectivity. You know that in the top inch of this water, the top inch, there are 3 distinctly different areas. There's on top of the water, an insect can actually stand on top of the water, right underneath the water, and that magic area in between, in the surface film. Now, if the insects, or if the trout are feeding on insects in the surface film, and you put one on top of the surface film, you're out of it. You're out of it. Let me tell you about selectivity in terms of degree of importance. I think water position, where your fly is the first area of importance. I think the size of the imitation is second. Size is very important. Shape probably is third. The shape of a long shape of a caddisfly, or the double body of possibly a little ant in the water. And finally, color. The very, very last thing in degree of selectivity. What are those fish actually eating out there? What kind of a fly should I put on? For a long time, I looked out there on the water and tried to see the fly. Sometimes I could see a fly standing on the surface, but most of the time I couldn't. It probably took me a year to understand that instead of looking out there, I should be looking right here. Now I can see the water going by. Look at these little airplanes coming down. Look at those. Chances are this is what those fish are eating out there. One of the secrets of dry fly fishing on smooth water is to extend that leader, to get a good long leader, because you want to be a fair distance away from that big heavy fly line. And we also want some delicacy on the fly. I'm going to put on some extra tippet. Now, how do we present that fly to the fish? First, I want you to imagine that little fly floating down on top of the water or in the surface film there. That tiny little animal, every little movement of water and air trembling as it comes down, and the fish eats it. And then another one comes down, that delicate little insect moving through the water, and the fish eats it. And then your fly comes along. A bunch of fur and feathers stuck on a piece of metal and attached to a rope, and it kind of comes through. Dumb as he is, that fish isn't going to take it. What we have to do is make that fly look alive. And we do that with our impressionistic ties. We do that by extending the tippet, which we've just done. And we also do that by introducing slack in the fly line, because if that fly line is tight, the currents are going to move the fly and cause it to drag across the top of the water. So we have to get some slack in the fly line as well. One of the good ways to get slack is a cast that's commonly called a bounce cast or something. I'm just going to cast out over the water, stop the rod, not follow it down. The line bounces back a little. Watch this cast. Let me false cast once or twice to get that fly dry. Now bounce. See the slack I got in the line? Now the fly's floating beautifully. On this even current, that cast would be a good cast. Sometimes when the current is a little more severe than that, what I do is kind of wiggle the end of the rod. They call that all kinds of names, the wiggle cast, the S cast, the serpentine cast. Watch it. This one's kind of fun. I aim it over the top of the water, and while the loop is going out, I go brrrr. I wiggle the end of the rod. See all the slack I got in that? Look at that beautiful drift. Look at that. You know, the problem with that cast is you sometimes pull the fly back when you do that. So I usually have a little extra line here, and when I start wiggling, I let this line slide out. Watch how I do that. A couple of false casts again, and I go boom, brrrr. And see, all the line comes up from here, and the fly lands about where I've aimed it. I got all those nice wiggles in the line. Perfect. Wiggle cast is really fun. You know what you can do? You can wiggle it real tight, almost vibrate the end of the rod. Or you can make great wide movements like this. Ooh. As the line straightens out, the faster currents pull the line ahead of the rod like this, and then the fly starts dragging in the water. And one of the things that we do to prevent that is while there's still slack in the line, we put a little bump upstream like that. That's called mending the line. That absorbs the faster water and keeps the fly moving down at a natural speed ahead of the leader in the line. Perfect. Which brings us to the last and very important presentation cast when you're casting across a current. This is true in any kind of water. It's a cast called a reach cast, and it looks like this. I cast out where I want it to go, and I move the back end over like this. Look at that wonderful upstream mend I've got. I immediately come back, point the tip of my rod at the fly, and I want to keep that line above the rod. This reach cast is a great cast. I want you to use it for nymphs and streamer flies. Use it for dry flies, obviously, anytime you're casting across the river. A beautiful deep water mountain lake, cold water, and trout, my friends. Where are we going to find these trout? One of the good places are inlets and outlets, like this. What you must really do is check the shoreline. The shoreline will indicate what the water is like around the shore. If it's a very steep shoreline, you've got deep water. If it's a shallow shoreline, like this. See this meadow coming down? That means shallow water here. Shallow water, more sunlight, more food for the trout. Where we want to look for those fish are edges. Edges, please don't forget that. Where this shallow water drops off into the deep water, a perfect place for fish to hold. Well, what are we going to use when we go fishing here? The trout in a lake like this eat very similar things to the trout in rivers. This speckled gray mayfly is just one of many species of mayflies that live in lakes. Of course, there are caddisflies, and dragonflies and damselflies are very important in still water, especially the nymphal form. This damselfly nymph will be a good choice. I use real long leaders in lakes with this floating line because I want, when I'm using a floating fly, I want the fly well distanced from the heavy fly line. When I'm using a sinking fly, I want that monofilament to be able to allow that fly to sink well. On the other hand, in lakes, I sometimes use sinking lines. And when you use sinking lines, my inclination is to use very short leaders, really short. 3, 4, 5 feet long, because it works a little better with those. Got to change retrieves every now and then. Sometimes a little slow, sometimes a little faster. And now I want to make a cast along that edge. That is really a great place to make a cast. I'm going to make several casts along that edge, as a matter of fact, because you see, trout in a lake cruise for their food. You know, in a river, they hold position and wait for the food to come to them. So while they're cruising, I might pick one up on the 3rd cast or the 5th cast. Doop, 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 doop. Come on, fish. Well, that fellow in a float tube finally caught a fish. And here we are on this magnificent trout lake, a perfect evening, 3 experienced fly fishermen, and the result, 0 fish. It's time for me to tell you one of the best kept secrets in all of fishing. The real truth is that much of the time you do not catch fish. Sometimes the fish wins. Warm water lakes and ponds. A different kind of fish here. We're talking about pike and bluegill and one of my favorite of all the sport fish, bass. Black bass, largemouth, smallmouth. You know, in Louisiana, they call them green trout, and they're a great fly rod fish. Before we start talking about this warm water, I want to introduce you to a new friend and a new fly fisher, Erica. She's going to help me today, and we're going to fish a little bit together. Bass are found in a little bit different kind of water than trout. Trout tend to cruise around the lake. They like water depth for cover. The black bass, he likes to ambush his food. He'll kind of hide underneath lily pads and vegetation and wait for food to come by, and bang, he'll nail one. And while all sport fish are opportunistic feeders, that is, that they're going to feed when there's available food, bass are a little more moody than others. They're opportunistic too, but bass are a little more. There's some times when they're just going to refuse everything, and times when they're going to almost jump in the boat. They're so aggressive. They're an intriguing and interesting fish. Now, the flies we use for bass are larger. As bass get bigger, they want bigger chunks of food than trout do. They eat mice and frogs, dragonflies, really big things. I'm going to use a little mouse here. And on this kind of fishing, I need a heavier, shorter leader. Something about 6 or 7 feet would be good, and good and stout on the end, because a bass isn't quite as wary as a trout. And we need that heavier leader to cast this big fly. And one of the things that we have to do in bass fishing is to cast our fly very close to cover, because they tend to hang in there real tight. This is kind of target practice. And then the secret of bass fishing is the retrieve. Bang, 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 bang. Let me get that out again. I'm going to let it sit for just a minute. And all those circles to stop. See those circles out there? I want them to stop. And now, maybe a bass is interested. I'm going to start a retrieve. Boom, 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 boom. See that, Erica?
Yeah.
See those dragonflies on the water? See them? They're laying eggs in the water, and that's why the bass are sometimes jumping clear out of the water trying to get those.
Yeah.
Let's change. This is a, hang on to that fly there. I'm going to take this mouse off. Kind of like the mouse though, don't you?
Yeah.
Isn't that neat? Let's try this guy. Looks a little like a dragonfly. Let's put this guy on. And maybe we'll do a little better with this. What do you think?
That looks good.
You think it's going to make it?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Probably they're going to think it's a dead dragonfly.
Now, these dragonflies probably don't move very much. So I'm going to put very little action on this guy. There he is.
Wow, you were right. They do like to hang out in there.
There we got one. Okay, we broke the ice. Okay, holding him by that lower lip like that doesn't seem to hurt the fish. You can take the hook out like that. Nice little bass, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, little guy, back you go. Okay, time for Erica to do a little fishing. Now we have something called a roll cast. Looks like this. What we just do is we come back come back till the line falls behind the rod. Now come forward. Just come forward. Flop.
Okay.
The secret of casting is you got to go stop, 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 and the line goes out. Do it again. Perfect. Now put the tip of your rod down right to the water and pull line through this hand. Now watch the fly. That's it. That's it. Keep retrieving. Boom. Boom. Lift. There, you got it. Hard. There he is. That's a nice fish. Beautiful. Boy, that guy really slugged it. Here, you sit down over there and let me help you. Ah! Oh, that's a beauty. Hold on, fish. Okay, maybe this guy will just come right out here with this hook. Beauty! Nice fish. Okay, you are now a fly fisher. Hi, Mara. Thank you. What you have to do is stop the rod to make the line go out. I go, stop, stop. I want you to watch my hand. Will you watch my hand? Okay, watch my hand. Stop, stop. See how it kind of rolls out? It's the whole secret. You want to try?
Yeah.
It's a deal. Let's give it a shot. We're going to go stop, stop. And the line goes out. Look at your hand. Stop, stop. Perfect. Now look at it. You want to do it wrong. Flop, flop. Loop. Flop, flop. No good. Stop, stop.
Stop, stop.
Perfect. When you want to cast further, here's what I want you to think.
Okay.
I want you to think of not throwing harder. I'd like you to stop harder.
Okay.
Let's go. Stop, stop. See that thing yank out?
Yeah.
Stop, stop.
Oh, I see.
Try that.
Stop, stop.
Perfect.
Stop,
Hard stop.
stop.
On the money. Stop the rod and the line goes out.
Un bello pez. Hermoso. Este es el Query Creek en el Take It Easy Ranch. Y esta es un área de captura y suelta. Quiero hablarles de esto de capturar y soltar un momento. Es un concepto difícil para los que nunca lo han experimentado. Y quiero hablarles de algunas posibilidades de pescar y soltar. Normalmente doy 2 días de seminario donde concluyo el seminario con una película sobre las truchas. En la escena final de la trucha, el viejo pescador toma la trucha y la pone de vuelta en el agua. Y la deja ir y se oye la música y todos empiezan a aplaudir al hacer esto. Un día, un alumno de 11 años dijo, yo no la dejaría ir. Y yo entendí lo que quería decir. Todos se quedaron en silencio un momento y realmente comprendí que la mayoría de los que estaban allí escuchando no habrían soltado al pez. Sospecho que ustedes no habrían soltado al pez tampoco. hay una gran discusión acerca de matar peces. Jacques Cousteau dice que el deporte de la pesca es una perversión. Y yo algo lo entiendo. Después de todo, estamos haciendo algo que es muy natural al hombre, salimos, capturamos algo. Eso que capturamos lo matamos y comemos, y esto es lo más natural en el hombre. Soltarlo es como hacer un deporte de algo que es genuino y real. Creo que sí pueden llamarlo perversión. Creo que los que quieren hacerlo así, atrapar y matar, deben hacerlo. Es una buena cosa. De eso se trata la caza y la pesca. Y no quiero que se sientan culpables. No dejen que todas esas revistas y organizaciones de preservación y maestros como yo los hagan sentir culpables. Pero debo decirles que hay otra cara de la moneda. Se trata de los ríos que no tienen peces suficientes para la población que pesca, de modo que no se puede. Como en este río. Hay tanta gente pescando en este río que si guardamos los peces no habría ninguno más para pescar. Creo que tenemos que soltarlos y regularlos. Pero aún más importante es el concepto filosófico de soltar los peces que quiero que consideren. Sé que no es lógico atraparlos y luego devolverlos al agua otra vez. Sé que esto es casi irracional, pero creo que puede ser un acto noble que hace el hombre. Creo que puede ser como la religión. Puede ser un concepto que tiene el hombre que es más de lo que él es. Satisface su gusto al cazar y además devuelve el pez al agua y se siente bien. Solo puedo decirles lo que yo siento. Empecé soltando peces por presión de mis pares, por los reglamentos de los ríos en que pesco. Y así comencé. Era doloroso al principio, pero les diré algo. Prefiero soltarlos ahora. Me hacen sentir mejor. No puedo en realidad dar más razones. Solo les digo que cuando los pongo en el agua y siento como la vida vuelve a él y lo veo moverse, me hace sentir muy bien. Quiero que ustedes prueben. Quiero que prueben de soltar un pez. Y espero que este sentimiento los acompañe.
Well, dear friends, we're just about finished. And endings are a little bit sad. But for many of you, I really hope this is going to be the beginnings of a wonderful sport. A sport that is one of the really fantastic and special connections with the outdoors. A sport that is so diversified that people get involved with aquatic entomology and they become expert and spend a lifetime at it. And other people take up fly tying and they make an art form out of fly tying. They wouldn't dream of getting one of their flies wet. People take up casting and the literature of fly fishing and on and on and on. And therein also lies its danger. I don't want you to be intimidated by all of these things. You don't have to go in any of these directions. It can be a simple huck fin experience. Just go out there with a rod and reel and a little box of flies and experience something in fishing. You know what I'd really like you to do? I'd like you to go out alone, without a guide, without a mentor of any kind. Just go by yourself and discover some things. That's what fly fishing really is. For me, fishing for me, glimpses of me, discovery, mostly moments.